Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion, an African just transition to a low carbon economy, insights from Kenya, Ghana, and Malawi. This is part of the discussions that we're having as part of the African Climate Week. Please note that under the ACW guidelines, this session will be recorded. And also, would like you maybe to mute as part of housekeeping rules. And I'm going to go through our agenda. So we are going to have welcome and introduction by myself, Chipom Konza. And then we are going to have a presentation from Kusum Lata, UNFCCC Secretariat, regarding just transition to a low carbon economy in the global climate negotiations. After that, we are going to have a discussion and insights from three partners representing Ghana, Malawi, and Kenya. Then we'll have Gareth Phillips to talk about investors' role in a just transition to a low carbon economy. My name is Chipom Konza. As I've indicated, I'm a climate strategy member since 2016, and I'm based in South Africa, where I'm a lecturer at Tshwane University of Technology, mainly looking at business and climate change, as well as green economy. And I also have a consultant where we do some research work on green economy, business, and climate change. So our agenda today, we want to understand what just transition means in the national context. And we also want to share relevant findings for the regions. As you know, that just transition is unique and is very contextual. We also want to clarify the relevance of just transition strategies for government development objectives, as well as climate change policies. Lastly, the aim of this webinar, we want to investigate if and how investors can provide leverage to facilitate this outcome. As a way of background, climate strategy works with different policy researchers, different countries in advancing climate policy through meaningful interactions between decision makers and researchers across Europe and internationally. So we have been working on a number of programs on just transition, including coal transition in Europe, Russia, and oil and gas transition in the North Sea countries. So for the past year and a half, climate strategies have been working on a project to deconstruct the perception that just transition is only for developed countries, and to enable the introduction of just transition strategies into developing country climate plans. So as a result of this, climate strategies has partnered with research institutions in 9 diverse countries. That is Argentina. We also have Colombia, Vietnam, Laos, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi. The aim in partnering with these countries is to explore and tailor what just transition strategies can and should look like in these country contexts. As I mentioned, that you find that the just transition debate is unique, and it brings in together a number of different stakeholders and views related to equity and justice. What would a just transition look like in Africa? in the background of climate change and COVID-19. These two, they have presented an urgent need for a just transition to a low carbon economy. With climate change, we find that more and more people have been marginalized. And recently with the COVID-19, the socioeconomic impact is quite devastating, and most people have been marginalized. So there is urgent need for a just transition to a low carbon economy, particularly in countries that have been, that are vulnerable, in those communities who face marginalization in the low carbon transition. Also, the COVID-19 was also shown that the landscape is really changing, and as countries try to address the impacts of COVID-19, as well as the impact, the commitments to climate change. So just transition is also important, and there is need to have a discussion on how we can factor in as also countries try to address climate change and COVID-19. In setting the scene, next slide. We want to find out what will be a just transition look like in Africa this evening as we look at the 3 countries. And there is no predetermined pathway, and the move towards low carbon is different, as I've mentioned, in each context and situation. So we have 3 questions that our presenters are going to look at. But firstly, we are going to have our first speaker, who is Kusam Lata, who is going to talk about just transitions to a low carbon economy in the global climate negotiations. Kusam Lata is a secretariat from the UNFCCC. Over to you, Kusum Lata.
Thank you so much for the nice background presentation, which covers really some issues and touch upon things which probably I'm going to touch a little bit in my presentation. When we talk about just transition in climate change, or in this UN convention in international format, I would say that it is very closely hooked into our Paris Agreement, where a preamble says that when countries are taking in actions for the Paris Agreement to mitigate or to achieve the objectives of Paris Agreement, the parties have to take into account the imperatives of just transition of the workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs in accordance with nationally determined development priorities. So this is a preamble which has been included in Paris Agreement, which provides a very broad guidance or a framework how just transition is looked under this UNFCCC context or climate change negotiations and actions to be taken. And in this respect, it is also very closely linked with the impacts of implementation of response measures work, where there are 4 work program areas. And one of the work program areas is actually just transition of workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs. So these are, I would say, very important two aspects which are being included in climate change negotiations and also in the actions to be implemented while we are trying to or striving to achieve mitigation and adaptation and other objectives under Paris Agreement. And again, taking further, there is a committee which has been established to implement impact of implementation of response measures, which is Katowice Committee on Impacts. And this committee, since it is working on these 4 aspects, and one of the aspects, as I just said, is on just transition, it has a couple of activities, I would say many activities which are related to just transition, because there are 4 other areas, but I would say although there are 4 areas, but one of the areas is only on just transition, but it does not mean that that is not linked to other areas, because if we see other areas which this committee is working on, The first one is economic diversification and transformation, and the other two are related to understanding impacts of implementation of response measures and what are tools and methodologies available to understand these impacts. And if I understand it, and how I understand is because when we are talking about just transition, we are looking at the aspect of social dimension. That means when we are moving to low carbon economies, how we are taking along with us people who are getting impacted by people. And that's how we look at just transition. We are talking about, you just mentioned, we are talking about coal transition, we are talking about other energy transitions or other areas. And if we see in Africa, there could be like some countries are planning for transition in transport sector, but we are not looking at exclusively as only technology transfer or how these sectors are going to accommodate or go into low carbon economies. We are looking at social dimension of it. That means how people are impacted and how these people who are impacted are taken into account while we are designing our climate policies. The policy should not be designed exclusively, but they should always consider how people are impacted, what kind of skills which are needed. Is there any group of people whose skills are going to be redundant in this transition, and how we are going to address those? And these are the kind of discussions I would say are needed, very well needed. And this is the time where we have to start talking about and thinking about such aspects. If I look at the work which has been done so far in terms of by countries. I mean, I know we are talking about these 3 countries very soon in next presentation, but if we look at the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which has been prepared by all the parties which are party to the convention and to the Paris Agreement, there are from 194 countries or parties, we have only 47 parties who have included just transition in their NDCs. And this includes 27 parties as EU. So I would say other than EU, there are only 20 parties who have seriously included, or I would say have acknowledged that there is a need of just transition. So it's a very limited number of parties who have acknowledged this aspect of it. And what kind of aspects they have included is basically trying to acknowledge that there is a concept of just transition, means that there is a need of taking needs of people into account while the transition is taking place. The parties are thinking to probably establish a just transition mechanism, or trying to establish a just transition fund, or they are trying to have some laws and strategies which protect the workers if they are getting impacted. There are some kind of social mechanisms which they are planning to put in place for jobs creations, for skills development, for employment policies, and how the consultation, or probably including some kind of consultation process to have social protection for these workers. So I would say that these are some of the ways how this has been included or been represented in these nationally determined contributions. But very clearly how this is going to be implemented is not clear. If I come to Africa, Namibia is one of the countries which has included it, and they have said in their NDC that there will be some measures in the climate measures which are having some key development indicators such as GDP, skills, jobs, and revenue distribution, inequalities, and gender. So in this way, these are like employment is considered as one of the indicators while they're implementing. And the national green job assessment model will be used while they are developing these indicators and working on them. So I would say these countries are also in a very nascent stage, and assessments will be done, but not yet concrete plan how this will be done. So I would say we are really standing on a very crucial time. And based on the work which we have done in some countries from climate change secretariat, we have seen that when countries are trying to make these kind of assessments, like we have some experience with some developing countries, there is no data available. When I say no data available, it means very limited data. Like suppose we want to see how many people are getting impacted by coal transitions or transport sector transitions. we don't have this data, how many people are employed in these sectors, in these countries. If they are being employed, then what are the skills of them, whether it is a low skills or high skills, like what kind of people are really getting impacted. So unless we know who is impacted, how can we even design policies? So when you said recently in your presentation that what kind of things investors should look into, I think investors have to look into one of the aspects is how to fund this just transition, because that's one of the key things. If we have to really provide some benefits to people who are getting impacted, we have to design their skilling program, or we have to see some people who cannot get job, like how they will be compensated in this transition, how they can be still kept employed. So these kind of fundings, where this funds comes from. And this is something which is a very crucial aspect. And second thing is like even to undertake these assessments, this data availability and to support which is required to even design these policies effectively. So this kind of support is really required. And maybe investors can look into those kind of support as well. There are some multilateral organizations who are supporting these national surveys, but I think that's survey are done from a different perspective. Most of the time it is from trade perspective, and such kind of climate initiatives or considerations are not taken into account. That's why probably we do not have enough data which is required for designing policies. So this kind of work probably it can be undertaken and very required for just transition. If I try another aspect, like because under climate change convention, there is also a requirement that there are some support which are being provided from developed to developing countries. And if we see that there are some supports which has been provided in this case, and the support which we have seen as of now, which has been reported by countries, is that they are helping or establish some systems and processes which promote sustainable and equitable transitions of jobs and workforce. There are some national dialogues which are being organized, or national summits which are being organized on just transition, which probably creates a lot of awareness. And it also informs practical steps and approaches that can be taken by businesses, workers, or for planning this effective and inclusive transition for everyone. I must say that UK and other EU countries, like they are quite advanced in planning of this. They have established to some extent very clearly how just transition mechanism is going to operate. And UK has started investing in providing opportunities to train and retrain and reskill their workforce, so that they can ensure that availability of right skills is available to deliver on low carbon transition and high value jobs. And at this point of time, I would say that if we want to realize all these commitments which countries are making, skilling and reskilling is required, because we cannot achieve these targets unless we reskill our people. So this is something which is again needed even to, we can make plans, but we cannot achieve these plans unless we have right skills available, and we cannot capture those opportunities which are available. Scotland also have Just Transition Commission, which has been established to provide practical advice on how to maximize economic and social benefits of decarbonization in Scotland. So I would say these are some of the ways how countries are planning to include just transition in their implementation of climate strategies in planning stage or in an implementation phase, but there's a lot more which needs to be done. And I encourage all the organizations and people who are listening to this meeting today, that there are a lot of work which are being done by Katowice committee on this aspect, and we time to time keep opening in call for inputs, and currently there is a call for input which is open to submit some practical approaches which are being taken by countries on just transition of workforce.
Assume you can round up a minute.
Yeah, I'm done. So if the countries are, or people or organizations who are interested in these topics, please do submit your interventions against this call for their consideration to be included in the reports which have been prepared by this committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great presentation and great insights. I want to say to our audience, We have a Q&A session there button. You can as well type in questions that you have as the presenters are presenting, then we may address them. If not, we'll be able to respond to them later. Now, we are going ahead with our presentation. And what I liked from Kusum is that she has mentioned that implementation, especially in Africa, is not clear, as well as the key development indicators. We want to hear presentations and insights from 3 different countries, Ghana, Malawi, as well as Kenya. So we have 3 presenters. The first one is Kwabena Anamani, who is a professor of economics at the University of Ghana, Department of Agriculture, Economics, and Agribusiness. He has been working with climate strategies on their South to South Just Transitions project for the past year and a half, the first African member of the consortium. He is also going to be joined by Herbert Mwalukumo, Director of Center of Environmental Policy and Advocates in Malawi, a policy think tank on environmental and natural resources. The other 3rd speaker is Richard Mulwa, Director and Senior Research Fellow at Environment for Development in Kenya. So they have 3 questions that they are going to base their discussion around. The first question, what are the key sectors and equity issues in a just transition to a low carbon economy? The second question is focused around what are the challenges and opportunities in engaging people in the just transition process. The third question, based on your experiences, what are the key challenges and opportunities for a just transition across Africa as a whole? So these are the 3 questions that they will be looking at. And I'm going to leave it to Professor Kwabena to start as they answer these questions for the next 25 minutes. Over to you, Prof.
I think, can you put the questions one by one again, question 1, so that we take the question one by one. The first question, please. Yes, the first question deals with what are the key sectors and equity issues in a just transition to low carbon economy. That's the first one I'm commenting on. In Ghana, we have done a detailed input-output analysis using 76 industries of the national table. And clearly, what we see is that the industries that are impacting a lot in terms of climate change emissions are agriculture, transport and storage, electricity generation, non-metallic minerals, rice milling, and mining. These are the ones that are producing a lot of carbon dioxide emissions, both in terms of direct and indirect effects. But the impacting industries are also different from those who are suffering, what you call the vulnerable industries. And the vulnerable ones obviously include much of agriculture, and it also includes much of the low-income people, which in that case, you cannot capture them in terms of industry, but you have to capture them in terms of the classification of people based on income. And in the just transition to a low carbon economy, the issues that will come is that you have to have special programs targeted to those people that will be vulnerable, especially those in agriculture and those that rely on the energy that is basically will be driven by water-based, like hydro dams, even though they don't cause a lot of emissions. A problem that exists is that climate change makes the weather erratic, and there's more energy shortages arising from the drought and others. So that would say, I would say for question 1, the answers are that the impacting industries are basically in electricity generation, transport, agriculture, mining, rice milling, and non-metallic minerals. The vulnerable, or those which industries and sectors of the economy to be impacted, especially those in agriculture and low-income people, especially those that are not able to afford basic living. So they will be impacted one way or the other. So that's the first question. Can we go to the second question again? If you can show the second question on the screen. Can you show the second question on the screen, please?
Yeah, maybe let's go to Herbert or Richard for their answers on the first question.
Okay, please, okay. So it's going to be question by question. Thank you.
Thanks, Gwimina.
Yeah.
So we are going to go to Herbert, over to you to address the first question.
Thank you so much, Chipo, and all the audience. I am Herbert from Malawi, Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy. And yes, to address the question of what are the key sectors and equity issues in a just transition to a low carbon economy in the Malawian context. So we are talking of a country that is predominantly dependent on rain-fed agriculture, and we are a landlocked country. And in terms of our climate response, but also in terms of our national determined contribution, we looking at sectors of forestry, agriculture, and energy as key sectors that contribute the highest in terms of emissions. But also when it comes to being impacted upon in terms of the low carbon agenda, then we are looking at primarily forestry, because this is a sector that has one of the significant potentials for ensuring that we reduce our emissions as a country. And that involves basically transitioning from dependence on biomass for cooking and heating, which is a big issue in Malawi, because 97% of the population depends on wood fuel for energy. And mostly it's the urban dwellers that rely on wood energy for cooking and heating. And so a just transition in that sense means that we have to go as a country, alternative energy solutions, including other renewable energy sources and wind energy, especially solar. But also within the biomass sector, then we are talking about going into sustainable charcoal production, for example, which is also not as easy. So that leaves along the way lose us in the sense that a good chunk of people do depend on wood fuel selling for their livelihoods, especially charcoal. So yeah, there has to be a way in which these people can be taken on board so that they are not left behind in ensuring that we are reducing deforestation, but also we are enhancing the carbon stocks of Malawi, which has a big potential for contributing to a low carbon economy. Similarly for energy, energy is also, as I just mentioned, because of the dependence on biomass, we need better energy solutions. But in terms of the national grid, our energy is predominantly hydro. Over 80% of our energy is actually hydro-based. So it is in itself already low carbon. However, because of the industrialization drive that the country has embarked on, in terms of the development blueprint, we are talking about industrialization. And for that reason, there is a lot of focus on going core, which is contrary to the agenda of transition and the global direction for a low carbon economy. So we are saying we need to make sure that we tame our appetite for coal and instead focus our energies on renewable energy, for which we already have huge potential actually. And it does not have any lost opportunities for job creation and ensuring that people have decent work. So those are the two areas where as a country we have to focus on, although our NDC at the moment does not mention the word or the phrase just transition, but that is what is going to become key when we are implementing our contribution. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Herbert. Interesting insights in sectors affected as we move towards a low transition to low carbon. Richard, your perspectives from Kenya regarding a just transition.
Yes, thank you very much, Chipo, and the other colleagues that are listening. So from a Kenyan perspective, let me address this from the National Climate Change Response Strategy and also the National Climate Change Action Plans, which are operationalizing the response strategy. And about 6 sectors have been identified as very critical in mitigation and achieving the NDC targets in our revised NDC. And these are agriculture, energy, industry, we have forestry, we have transport and waste management. Now, if you get to agriculture, I think we are moving in the direction of trying to do conservation tillage and also encouraging agroforestry. If you go to the energy sector, if you look at the structure of energy in the country, what we have is most of the people depend on biomass. And of course, we have electricity. But then if you look at the composition of the electricity, about 54%, I think, is from geothermal, 44% is from hydro. And then we have some of it coming from thermal, which is petroleum generated. So there's a movement again into the renewable energy. And I think Kenya is moving very fast in that direction to try and make sure most of its electricity is generated from renewable energy. If you get to industry, there's cement manufacturing, which has been identified as one of the key polluters, but also charcoal production. I think this is at a lower level. We are trying to see whether there are ways of producing more efficiently the cement that is produced here, or trying to cut down on charcoal production. We already have policies in place for that. Then you get to forestry. I think recently we were just developing the National RED Plus strategy, and we are moving in the direction of trying to reduce, to do afforestation, reduce forest degradation. And then when we get to transport, the country is moving in the direction of the bus rapid transport. Now that has implications for the public transportation system in the country. And the question is, what is it that we are going to do for the already existing system? In transportation of cargo from the port of Mombasa to Nairobi and to other countries in the region, we have the standard gauge railway. So most of the trucks that are doing this are going to probably be replaced. So again, we have challenges in that area. In waste management, we are moving again in the direction of trying to see whether we can generate electricity from the landfills of the waste. And then I think finally, I think I've already covered all the sectors. Now, when you get to equity issues, you'll find that there are equity issues. First of all, from the climate sense, you're going to discover that all these sectors have been allocated different levels of emissions reduction in the NDC. And again, if you get to the social dimensions, you're going to discover that even as we are transiting, some people are going to lose jobs. And then we might want to invest in either training them or giving them decent green jobs elsewhere. So that's a challenge. Then we have the good governance framework, because when we are transiting, we are going to be needing investors. What investment climate are we offering as a country? So those are some of the things that I would say that are very critical for Kenya. So thank you very much, Chipo.
Thank you very much for quite interesting, as well as the key sectors. We see that in all the three, agriculture, energy, forestry, they keep on coming up. Our second question is focused around what are the challenges and opportunities in engaging people in the just transition process? I'm going to start with Kwebina, Prof, and if you can have 2 minutes to respond. Thank you.
I'll be quick. The question is about challenges and opportunities in engaging people in the transition project. We had experience with the pilot survey and also the first phase. So we are able to get a gauge on this. Very quickly, the challenges are dealing with information to the mass of the population. Majority of people, especially those in the informal sector, simply do not have any information. And even government departments and agencies such as the National Development Planning Commission, we talked to them on Monday, they seem to be doing things closely to just transition, but they have not couched them in terms of the terms used. So the challenge is to get people to be more involved with the strategies, even though they may be on the right track, to more or less get their agenda molded onto the right track. That will be, I think, some of the challenges. The opportunities is clear. Opportunities are very clear. From the informal sector survey we did, we found that a lot of the informal sector are interested in the just transition process. They are very, very interested. And what came out is that they were complaining that government is willing to tax them, but for something very important like just transition, where they can be involved in the help, they are not informed. So I think in terms of opportunities, there's a big opportunity to engage informal sector workers. Finally, we also did survey of two paramount chiefs and 2 paramount queen mothers. And there's opportunity to engage traditional councils, chiefs, and other people, because they tend to be the stewards of water bodies and some of these natural assets which will be influenced by climate change. So overall, in a summary, there are challenges to get policymakers and those involved in implementing and formulating climate change policies and also just transition process to be more akin to the strategies involved in this process. And opportunities, we need to focus more on informal sectors of the economy and also traditional councils and chiefs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kwebina. Yebet.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the challenges for engaging people, one of it, which is quite key, is the general resistance to issues of low carbon transition, because of the understanding that as a developing country, we have not done as much in terms of carbon emissions. And therefore, we do not have historical responsibilities to contribute to this policy. So much so that even though we have our NDCs that stipulate various initiatives and projects, but most of those are really conditional on support, external support for us to be able to implement the NDC. So that in itself is one of the inherent challenges that you tend to face, but also the narrow economic base of our economy. That means that people have to rely on the industries that are like in the forestry sector that tend to be contributing more to deforestation. And that in itself is a challenge. The opportunities are that there are existing policies that state very well what we need to do, both in terms of the climate change policy, the NDC, but also the development blueprint, which is a long-term development strategy. It's very clear on ensuring that we address the impacts of climate change. And that obviously also comes along with ensuring that we address the vulnerabilities that come as a result of the impacts of climate change. So that is a big opportunity that needs to be exploited, including the institutional structures that have been created as a result of the various policy instruments for addressing climate change. So even though the dialogue on just transition in itself is not yet even on the table, because like I said, it's not included in our NDC, both the first and the revised one. And so this is beginning, I mean, it's going to be sort of a pioneering discussion in our context so that we are on the same page as a country. So those are the challenges and opportunities I can highlight.
Thank you, Herbert. Over to you, Richard.
Yes, thank you very much, Chipo. And let me say that to begin with, if you look at the updated NDC for Kenya, just transition is just mentioned as a contextual aspiration of joining the Paris Agreement. So you can say that it's virtually non-existent, and involving people in something that is not there, that's already problematic. So let's say that this is quite a broad discussion, and trying to bring stakeholders together is going to be a challenge. Now you have quite a number of sectors, and you have vertical and horizontal integration of these sectors. So when you start talking about just transition, there will be a challenge of who are you going to pull and from which sector, and how are they going to be impacted by movements in another sector. Then let me also talk about the policy and legal infrastructure in the country. Now, there's quite a lot on climate change policy, financing policy in the country. And also the different sectors have their different policies also, specific ones. You're not going to find anything trying to adjust, to address just transitions. So in as much as this is a challenge, it's an opportunity going forward probably to see whether it's possible to improve on what is existing. More importantly is the aspect of identifying who the gainers and the losers are in this game of just transition. And as I think Kusum Lata mentioned, is a problem of data that we don't have. So if you don't have data, then there's a challenge of getting to know who you're going to compensate when it comes to the social dimensions. Finally, even if it comes to compensation, this is going to need, will have budgetary implications. So we have the money to do that, and are we prepared to do that? So I think those are some of the challenges that I could see when trying to engage people in just transitions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. Interesting take on challenges and opportunities in all the three different countries. I'm going to ask Ron Tan to unmute yourself. I see your hand. Then we can take your question before we go to the third question to be addressed. Ron Tan.
Okay. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. I'm Ron Tan from Singapore. Basically, I've been attending this forum for the last 3 days. So today you're discussing about transition to low carbon or zero emission economy. Kenya, Malawi, and I think it's Ghana, right? So basically, there's a lot of talk about agriculture, but there's no mention that the current way of practicing agriculture is incorrect and also wrong. Why? Because they are using a lot of chemical toxic NPK fertilizer. Number one, they're leaching all into your waterways, Lake Victoria, everything is destroyed. Fisheries are dead, algae bloom. Then it's very toxic, cyanobacteria are being bred from the algae bloom, and your fisheries you consume is actually very bad for the human health. The water you consume is very bad because there's cyanotoxin in the system because of the leaching NPK fertilizer that are being used in Kenya. I've spoken to William Ruto, your vice president, personally. He said, oh, my country uses a lot of NPK. I told him to stop. That was in 2018. I've been to Nairobi, and I met all your climate change minister, NEMA, DG, and all that. But for the moment, there's no change to policy. There's no policy to change to organic fertilizing. Even you need very strong policy like Sri Lanka to completely ban the use of toxic chemical inputs and pesticides into the current agriculture system. Unless you change that, because these two applications, producing NPK and usage, they are all very carbon intensive and very pollutive and very high CO2 emission. So you need to review your NDC and also review your policy to ban toxic NPK fertilizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. In the interest of time, we are going to move to question 3, and then they will respond later. The question 3, based on your experiences, what are the key challenges and opportunities for a just transition across Africa as a whole? Kwabina, may start.
Thank you very much, Chipo and the other in the session. The experience, based on my experience, the key challenges and opportunities of just transition across Africa, we'll have to look at the common theme of agriculture, where we have to make it environmentally friendly so that we limit the burning of land, especially the cropland burning. Biomass burning is a major source of emissions. If you look at the national output table, where we have actually been able to calculate the amount of carbon dioxide emitted each year, biomass burning, I think, cuts across Africa in terms of what was causing greenhouse gas emission. The electricity generation is increasingly moving away from hydro to other sources that also bring in more carbon dioxide emission. And the big one is transport. The transport industry rely often on many cars that need to be retooled, or they tend to emit a lot of greenhouse gas. Transport and storage is a common theme. We need to look at reducing the emissions. In terms of opportunities, there's one key opportunity that we need to recognize. That is, we have been missing the traditional councils. Throughout Africa, chiefs are important. They are not even mentioned in the UNFCCC and many documents. This is a chance across Africa to bring along the traditional council, the chiefs, queen mothers, and others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kwabina. Herbert, if you can respond in a minute or so.
Yes, I think the biggest general challenge I would say is that in terms of the African context, the discussion about just transition needs to be quite contextual, because most of our countries are not highly industrialized, they are not carbon intensive. And so what just transition means in the African context is very much in the context of the vulnerabilities that we experience as a result of the impacts of climate change. But in terms of the opportunity, we have the opportunity to build on existing status of the fact that we are low emitters, and therefore, instead of going backwards to invest more in the high emitting sectors, we have the opportunity to build on existing efforts and existing comparative advantage to invest more in the renewable energy, so that that becomes a model for what a just transition would look like for socially to all communities and the impacted societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert. Richard.
Yes, thanks again, Chipo. I think one of the most important things, the power dynamics and political economy of just transitions in Africa, because most of the sectors, I think many countries, if you look at South Africa, for example, it's coal dependent in its energy. And if you are transiting there, there's going to be a lot of politics with very many stakeholders trying to pull in different directions. So I think that's very critical. if you look at Africa, again, we have a very strong informal sector. Again, the data is not there to get to determine who is where. So moving forward, I think that will be a challenge for Africa in trying to involve the informal sector in the just transitions, but also the gender dimensions in Africa also very strong. We have almost assigned roles for different genders, and we need to carry everybody with us. So finally, I think we need new financing instruments for just transition. I think we have climate finance. Maybe we can have just transition financing the same way we are having instruments like green bonds for climate financing. We could see whether that would be possible. For Ron Tan, I think the discussion you're raising about Kenya, I think those issues can be reacted to. I think they are quite pertinent. But for now, I don't think we have time for that. Thank you very much, Chipo.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to introduce Gareth Phillips from the African Development Bank to give a response to the discussion and speak on what the African Development Bank is working on in relation to a just transition. Over to you, Gareth.
Thank you very much indeed, Chipo. I hope you can hear me. I've had this problem before that the Zoom is slow to respond. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can continue.
Good. Okay, good. Okay, now the video's come on. So thank you very much. It's been very interesting to listen to the interventions and starting right at the top from Kusum. I think, so a number of points I'd like to make. So the multilateral development banks in general, so a group of us, Inter-American, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and Islamic Development Bank, and so on, along with AFDB, we have been working on the development of principles for just transition because we're very conscious of the issues that our countries face. And it's been interesting to compare the different approaches from the different banks and the different regions. In the African context, we have pushed very hard for a broader definition of, or a broader approach to just transition, which, I mean, I think that Kusum said, you know, the approach was quite broad already, but what I've seen is the focus on, and if I take the example of your slides, the focus is consistently on a low carbon transition. And we actually wanted to broaden that out. And in our principles, we broadened that out to say that we want to focus on a low carbon and climate resilient just transition, because for many African countries, of course, they're already relatively low carbon because of the lack of access to fossil fuels. And okay, it's a reliance on biodiversity and sources of emissions from agriculture and so on. But the general level of emissions from economies are far below what we see in other countries. And so the you know, this importance of climate resilience is very relevant because adaptation and resilience are very important to African economies. So we see that just transition needs to ensure that the costs and benefits of a transition to low carbon and climate resilient development are spread evenly across the population. So everybody should be able to benefit from the advantages, and the costs and the burden should be shared evenly. And it's been interesting to listen to some of the examples that came out, because some of them I'd written down as examples that I wanted to cite. So I think Herbert mentioned charcoal production, for example, and also the transporters of the charcoal production. If we move to clean cooking and bottled gas, then we need to address the employment opportunities for those individuals. And that's a typical classic example of just transition from a labor point of view, from a dirty industry going to a clean industry. But then, if we look at it from a climate resilient point of view, then, we might see examples where countries have to start managing their landscape to cope with flooding. And so we might have to give up some areas of land or move back coastline and make it available for rising sea level. This means that, people are going to lose their livelihoods, they're going to lose the places that they live, and we need to take that into consideration in a just transition. We mentioned transport as an example. I think it will be very challenging to move fairly from an informal transport system of minibuses and tuk-tuks and rickshaws and so on and taxis to mass rapid transport and or clean buses and so on. These would be very difficult challenges to take into consideration. And so, our awareness and our approach to just transition needs to be really very broad and take these issues into consideration. A couple of other areas that haven't come up that I'd just like to mention. One that I'm particularly keen on is green hydrogen. I think that the potential for Africa to become a net source of green hydrogen is very exciting. We have enough solar power and wind power here in Africa to more than meet our needs and to take the spare capacity when we're not at peak demand and use that to create green hydrogen. Europe, North America will have massive demand for green hydrogen as they move forward, particularly in Europe already with the emissions trading scheme. And some of you may have heard of their carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is going to encourage people to start using these kinds of fuels. So Africa could be in a very strong position to provide resources. Korea is leading on the development of an industrial use of green hydrogen, and they are signing up with Australia to be their main producer of hydrogen from the solar capacity in Australia. So Africa needs to get on that train, and that's a very just a transition where African economies could become a supplier of energy to Europe and North America. And one more point on carbon markets and ITMOs and so on. I'm very keen on pricing structures there. And that those the benefits from trading activities under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement are fairly shared across society, because these are sovereign assets that are going to be traded, and I'm concerned about who gets the access to sell those and to profit from them, whereas in fact all of society should do that. So just to move to a close, Richard, I think mentioned
Thank you.
about,
You can wrap up, Gareth.
Yes, I will do so. Richard mentioned financing, and I think we can possibly see the provision for just transition funds, or at least criteria for just transition coming into financing decisions from GCF and from donors. And very finally, getting the traditional chiefs involved and dealing with marginalized communities and people is going to be critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Interesting opportunities and awareness campaigns towards a just transition. I also want to acknowledge Geoffrey Julius from Tanzania. Yes, opportunities are available, will be contacted. For those who would want to collaborate and learn more about the South to South Just Transition Program, you may visit the Climate Strategy website, or you may contact Nia Hanjan at Climate Strategies. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and looking forward to more interactions and more engagements. Thank you.